I'm so hard.
Well, not really. You're actually pretty low tier.
Oh, come on, I'm made of rocks.
Only like a couple of inches, though, and once I break through that shell, you've got an ooey gooey center.
Please don't talk about my chest that way.
You're just like a gumball.
I hate you.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, there have been plenty of talks in the community about the difficulty of both base Monster Hunter Rise and now the Sunbreak expansion as well. And while most of these talks have been about the games as a whole, I thought it was about the right time to talk about it in terms of the monsters themselves. Some monsters are easy, some are hard, and some are just sort of somewhere in the middle, nowhere specific to go. But none of that really means anything unless we are actively going to compare them to each other, creating a hierarchy of sort of a food chain of monster hunting. And so today I'm going to be going over my personal rankings of the most difficult monsters in all of Rise and Sunbreak in a tier list format, starting off with the ones that I feel almost bad for hunting, all the way up to the ones that I feel great pain just from thinking about hunting. Of course, this is all my personal opinions, and you may disagree, so if you think a monster should be shifted one way or the other, feel free to say so down in the comments. But for now, without further ado, let's begin in the bottom tier with Rathian. Yes, I know, there are monsters that are almost objectively easier, but just on a personal level, I consider this the easiest fight there is in the game. There isn't anything that can really trip you up once you know the backflip exists, and otherwise she's just a big punching bag full of attacks that leave her head wide open to attack, which lets you do loads and loads of damage while barely even having to dodge in the first place. Then comes to Tranadon. He has a move or two that will actually make you consider your positioning, but for the most part, he's just too big of a punching bag as well. He has some pretty weak body parts that are very large, which makes it very easy to deal damage to him, and his attacks are slow enough that it's easy to dodge pretty much everything that he does. The only exception to this placement is the afflicted version of him, only because his damage becomes so ungodly high that being hit once puts you in a terrifying situation. After that is Viserios. The only thing that makes Viserios hard is dealing damage to him in the first place. His moveset is incredibly easy to deal with in every sense, he just has a hard body himself. Everything he does is slow as hell, and none of it is particularly damaging. After that is Misitsune. This one I'm sure lots of people will disagree with, but there's just something about fighting Misitsune that I find incredibly simple. Maybe it's all the time that I spent fighting him in the demo for Rise, but the vast majority of his attacks are just visual flavor moves to me that you can walk up to him while he's doing them and just attack him without fear of danger. He even makes bubbles that heal you and also bubbles that raise your attack power. He gives you buffs.
He's helping us.
Then we have Cooley Yaku. I love this monster, but he's just easy. No real tricks up his sleeve, and he didn't even get the master rank changes that made him have at least some challenge to him in Iceborne. Great Baggy, after that, Sleep is annoying, that's literally it. Great Roggy, Poison is also annoying, but basic raptors just don't really have any sort of difficulty to them. Moving up to the next tier, we'll start at the bottom end with Legambi. He slips and slides around a bit, which is annoying, but no way do I consider this actually difficult. He just makes the fight take a little bit longer by doing so. Then comes Royal Ledros. His head is just a massive blinking sign that says hit me, and then when you do, the fight is over within 3 minutes. Aknasom at least has some intrigue to him, but while some of his moves are interesting, they are still incredibly easy to dodge and also quite low damage even if they do hit you. Volvidon would be on the lowest tier here, except that he uses Stench. If you get hit by Stench, he may actually be able to kill you, just from a lack of you being able to heal. Outside of this, I don't see any difficulty with him anywhere at all. Daimyo Hermitar, unfortunately, again, just not a whole lot going on here. He has a couple of attacks that can hit a bit hard if they do hit you, and some of his easier to attack body parts aren't overly weak to damage, but he is the first monster that you fight in Sunbreak for a reason, and it isn't because he's hard. Tobi Kadachi has a couple of ranged moves and darts around the place quickly, but most of it is quite easy to dodge, and again, he's sort of just a walking weak point to damage, just asking to be smacked by a weapon. Then we have Pookie to finish off the tier. Poison is a little bit annoying to deal with, and he isn't bad at applying it to you in the first place, but outside of that, he's just again a big walking punching bag without many tricky attacks to dodge at all. Then we move up a tier and start with Basal Geese. I think Basal actually has the ability to kill people sometimes. He definitely was a bit harder in World and Iceborne in my opinion, but in this game he isn't bad by any means. The real reason for this is people have fallen in love with counter abilities in Sunbreak, and if you try to counter Basal Geese, you'll more than likely have an egg explode under you and do damage because his attacks happen in multiple stages. Essentially, if you treat him with any sort of respect, he just won't do very much to you, so that's what you gotta do.
Oh, I made myself sad.
After that is Juratotus. He's gotten some new ranged attacks that make him more annoying than he was before, but for the most part, he just sort of slinks around in the mud waiting for you to smack his giant head. He has become slightly deadlier, but only by a very slim margin. Then comes Nargacuga. He has regained his double tail slam, which can definitely catch you off guard the first couple of times that you fight him in Master Rank, but for the most part, this is easy to dodge, and once you do, he will just sit there with his tail stuck in the ground, waiting for you to attack his weakest body part. Next comes Bishotten. He can poison you, which sucks. He can paralyze you, which sucks, but for the most part, he is just a pretty acrobatic show that you get to enjoy watching, but he doesn't do a whole lot that is actually dangerous to you. Afterwards is his subspecies, Bob. He has a few stronger attacks, a bit more likely to hit you with his general moveset, but without the statuses, he doesn't have a massive amount of kill potential, just a lot of chip damage that you can heal back from unless you got too stubborn and refuse to drink a potion. Then comes Great Azuchi. This monster is easy, but he comes with 2 smaller monsters alongside him, and I just don't have enough eyes to track 3 monsters at once, so clearly he's harder than anything up to this point. Yeah, I did just say that Great Azuchi is harder than Bazelgeuse. I do what I want.
Let the hate flow through you.
Then we have Baroth. His weak point is actually somewhat hard to hit consistently, and he charges at you a lot with his really thick face. I have fainted to a Baroth before, I'll admit it, but at the end of the day, he is still relatively low tier when it comes to difficulty. After that is Arzuros. Most of his moveset is just swinging his claws around, but he isn't half bad at doing that, and hilariously, if you carry honey in your backpack, you turn his pin attack into a period of downtime where you can just hurt him for free, which is just the mechanic built in to make him actively easier than he would be otherwise. Then capping off this tier, we have Anjanath. He has a couple of reasonably strong moves, he gets more dangerous when he's enraged, but I just don't find him difficult to dodge at all, and his head is just a massive weak point, which I love to smack with blunt weapons. Moving on up then to the next tier, then these monsters are actually starting to get reasonably capable of killing you. We have Zenogre. In Rise, they changed up his moveset a fair bit, and in Sunbreak he got even stronger with a couple of different combo additions. However, outside of his afflicted form, I just don't think that he deals enough damage with each attack to actually be a big threat. If we were talking about afflicted monsters, however, this would be a totally different story. After that is Rakna-Kadaki. She got some interesting changes recently that allow her to combo web and fire quite a bit better. She moves a bit more fluidly, but the hardest thing about fighting her is that her head is her weak point, and you can only attack it at very rare points in the fight when she chooses to stick it out for you. For the most part though, she's just easy to dodge and doesn't do enough damage to kill you in one combo. After that comes Somnicanth. She has access to both sleep and flash bombs, both of which are pretty good at disabling you for short periods of time, and if she does that when you are already injured, she can definitely dunk on you and score a kill every once in a while. After that though comes Aurora Somnicanth. This one loses the sleep and flash aspects of base Somnicanth, but the moveset in general becomes a fair bit more damaging, and so I think it's just a touch harder overall. Then we have Wind Serpent Ibushi. Originally he was only fightable in the Rampage, and in that situation it was sort of hard to judge difficulty due to not having a feint limit. However, when you fight him outside of this, you realize a lot of his moveset is just sort of fun rather than hard. He even gives you wind tunnels to fling yourself into to actually protect you from his attacks, rather than leaving them there as traps to get you hits.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Then comes Pyre Rakna-Kadaki. The moves here are a bit more explosives and a bit more punishing than base Rakna. She can definitely do more damage, but I still don't consider this one particularly high up the threat list by any means. Next we have Almadron. Personally I don't consider him difficult at all, but I know a lot of people out there just don't enjoy this fight, so I put him up this high mostly just for your sakes rather than my own. For the most part I find if you just stick up close to his head, he isn't dangerous at all and is actually pretty easy to put damage into as well. After that is Astalos. This monster got a nice upgrade in Sunbreak, but while it is quite speedy, I don't think the actual damage per hit is quite enough to justify just how easy a lot of the attacks are to dodge. There's a lot of telegraphing going on, and once you learn his tells, it's easy enough to avoid pretty much everything that he does. After that is Gosharag. He's a fun monster, and has a couple of attacks that definitely could kill you, but for the most part he relies quite heavily on patterns, and is extremely learnable as a monster, by which I mean once you have fought him a few times, he becomes incredibly easy to just not get hit by when you fight him. You can predict what he's going to do before it happens, all while dealing great damage to his weakest parts, which he just holds out in front of his face. He can be tough, but I definitely don't think he is in the upper 50% of the monsters in this game when it comes to difficulty. Then we have Garangolm. This monster is slow as hell, but can actually pack quite a punch when it does hit you, and it is a result of that he's even been placed as high. He is reasonably easy to dodge, but if you do get hit, you may well regret it when you cart. Then we have Shogun Cenotar. This monster uses the new version of the bleed status introduced in Sunbreak, which is actually somewhat annoying to deal with, and unlike the earlier crab on this list, he has a lot of attacks that are actually pretty decent at catching you off guard. For the most part though, as long as you get rid of bleed when it hits you and make a point of healing in between attacks, it will struggle to properly kill you. Then we move on to the next tier, and monsters that I think that have definitely claimed a fair few number of carts in their time. From here, everything I think is reasonably difficult, of course only getting harder and harder as we go up further. Starting off then we have Gold Rathian, who was added in Title Update 1. I think she was the easiest monster that was added in this update, but given the deadly poison and the general speed that she has, she can definitely still take some heads. Her attacks can look a little bit silly at times, but the silly attacks tend to make them a bit harder to dodge as a result, and so easier to hit you with. Afterwards is a Diablos. This is a monster who is classically known for his difficulty in the series, but I think he's a bit easier than he has been in the past in Sunbreak, partially due to all the counters that we have as hunters. However, regardless of this, he has one new move where he will cancel a charge and do a delayed giant horn stab that almost always catches me off guard, and that just even by itself is quite the difficulty bump for a monster to have, hence his placement. Then comes Malzeno, and the introduction of Blood Blight. This makes your healing less effective and encourages playing aggressively, but obviously playing like that can also lead to carting if you aren't careful. His general moveset is pretty easy to understand and learn, but he can still definitely take you off guard quite easily. Then we have Magma Almadron. I consider this monster to be a fair bit harder than Basal Almadron, mostly just about the amount of areas of damaging effects that he'll place all over the ground, rather than just mud that slows you down. With him, if you are standing in the wrong place, you are pretty likely to be punished, and that could definitely lead to a cart. Next we have Rathalos, plain old Rathalos. I think this monster got much harder in Rise than it has been in quite a few games, and its master rank changes didn't hurt it either. I don't have any particularly strong feelings towards Rathalos, but I definitely think it is capable of killing people.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
Barioth is one who got somewhat of an upgrade in Master Rank, actually stealing some moves from Nargacuga with some tail sweepy shenanigans, but for the most part the most dangerous part of this monster is still his big pounce attack. He has quite a varied moveset, and a varied moveset makes it harder to dodge because it's harder to predict, which increases the difficulty in general. After that is Lunagaron. This is a bit of a fun one because it has a couple of different modes that it fights in, and I think that these modes have drastically different difficulty levels from each other. When he's on all four legs, he's a piece of cake, but when he stands up on his hind legs, he actually becomes relatively dangerous, and I quite enjoy that difference personally. Next then is Seregios. He gets access to the new bleed, and he flies around the place like crazy, rarely ever sticking to one spot. This tends to draw fights out longer than they are against most monsters, simply because it's hard for you to hit him with the proper combos, and longer fights mean more opportunities for you to cart. After that, we have Apex Misitsune, the first Apex on this list. I consider this to be the easiest of the Apex monsters personally, which again sort of just sums from my finding base Misitsune's moveset incredibly easy to deal with. I do think this is quite a bit harder than regular Misitsune though, hence why it is 4 tiers higher, but still not crazy hard in the grand scheme of Monster Hunter. Then we come to Apex Arzuros, a lot of claw swipes, but now dealing significantly more damage. It has some good butt-based attacks, but he just generally doesn't stop moving anywhere close to as much as regular Arzuros. It makes it hard to keep consistent damage up on him, while he just sort of spams high damage claw swipes at you, which can definitely murder you. Then is Gore Magala. I think this monster is actually relatively easy in Sunbreak. It has a couple of moves that can absolutely take you off guard, a couple of slams that have somewhat awkward timing, which makes them harder for you to dodge, and as a result it is totally capable of causing carts without issue. But I think this is one that with a few fights against you probably learn the patterns of enough to avoid genuine danger on a regular basis. Next up is Shagaru Magala, last monster of this tier. This is definitely a slight step up from Gore, gaining access to a larger variety of attacks, but this larger variety also includes a couple of moves that leave him open for you to hit him back, which sort of just makes it easy to punish. As well, he is incredibly weak to poison, and any monster with a particularly notable weakness will struggle to be among the elite when it comes to killing power.
That ridiculous man hasn't realized his weakness.
Moving on up to the A tier then, let's start off with Lucent Nargacuga. It has invisibility, but unfortunately you can still track it through this because it kicks up dust and it's got its glowing red eyes. This makes it a pretty cool effect that looks visually awesome, but it doesn't make the fight particularly harder than not being invisible. It just makes you have to pay more attention. That said, it gains a few moves that are a bit of a nuisance as well. It has access to poison, which can leave you in a precarious position, and just in general, every attack that it has gained that regular Nargacuga doesn't have is actually pretty threatening, which gives him a nice bump up in difficulty in general. Then we have Seething Bazelgeuse. This has a lot more ability to catch people out than base Bazelgeuse does, especially in Sunbreak. The bombs have a little bit different of an explosion timing while dealing a significant amount more damage, and his new tail-dragging dive bomb is definitely deadly, as is the delayed head smash move until you get used to the timing of it. After that is Silver Rathalos. I think this is the deadliest monster that was added in Title Update 1, with the only thing keeping it from being even more dangerous being that you can only fight it in an arena, and therefore have full Spirit Bird buffed health before you even walk into the fight. If you had less health, I think you would be an incredibly deadly creature. He is speedy as hell and has plenty of moves capable of catching you off guard, while dealing pretty decent damage as well. Then comes Thunder Serpent Narwa. There is no Master Rank version of base Narwa, so we'll be talking about the high rank experience here, but her moves dealt quite a lot of damage, and her weak spot being her belly was hard to hit unless you got a knockdown. The fight would last for ages, and unless you are a ranged weapon main, it can just be hard to keep up the damage against her, which gives her unusual attack patterns even longer of a chance to murder you. After that comes Tigrex. I know some weapons have an easier time against Tigrex, but I will always fight in favor of the concept of Tigrex just being a bit of a bully. His damage is very high, he moves very fast, unless he is literally exhausted like the exhaust status, he just won't stop using attacks, charging around the place, spinning, jumping, and slamming his head into the ground trying to bite your head off. And it works, it hurts, and it kills. Then we have Espinas. The fight starts with the monster asleep to lure you into a bit of a false sense of security, but don't be fooled. Once it gets going, this monster does an absolute buttload of damage and has a lot of nasty attacks with particularly large hitboxes as well, very capable of taking you out. Not to mention the ability to apply both poison and paralysis simultaneously. And when it does this, if it follows up on you wriggling around on the floor, you're pretty likely to need a ride back to camp afterwards. Then we have Rajang. Everyone knows how hard Rajang is. I feel weird for even trying to explain it to you honestly. He does an insane amount of damage and he moves incredibly quickly. His attacks have wide hitboxes, and when he goes all red arm mode, it gets pretty hard to even deal decent damage to him, as the most weapons struggle to hit his head without bouncing off of his arms first. After that is Furious Rajang. In some ways, I think this monster is actually sort of easier, but the main thing that makes it harder in my opinion is the fact that you cannot attack its tail to knock it out of its enrage. That is the one saving grace of Rajang that makes him more reasonable, and Furious Rajang doesn't have it. He is simply enraged for as long as he is enraged, and you just sort of have to deal with it. Then we have Cashala de Ora. This monster has a good amount of new attacks as part of its general rework in Rise and Sunbreak, and while it has gotten less frustrating to fight in general, I still consider it quite hard. He spends a fair amount of his time firing tornadoes at you, which are hard to dodge, especially as they converge on each other randomly. He has a few combos that can still easily quite lead to your death, and while it isn't anywhere close to as obnoxious as he once was, he does still have an effect that wind pressures you backwards if you get too close to his main body when he's angry. Next we have Apex Rathian. This monster is quite deadly. I consider it harder to deal with than Gold Rathian, as it even focuses more on the backflips and making them more of a prominent part of the fight, rather than Gold Rathian, who gets a bit more fireball-y. The damage of Apex Rathian is quite high, and this one definitely killed me a fair few amount of times when I've fought it in the past. After that is Apex Rathalos. Big fireballs fire everywhere, and of course, explosions. This monster takes everything that makes the reworked Rathalos of Rise and Sunbreak somewhat hard and kicks it up one hell of a notch, making it one of the harder fights in the game in my opinion. Then we have Kezu. Yeah, I know, some people disagree with me. After all, even the game considered Kezu somewhat of a low tier monster, but the moveset it has is just nasty to deal with. It has massive hitboxes, it can hit you from across the zone, and worse than that, it has attacks that just hit everywhere around it in a 360-degree radius, making it extremely hard to stay in melee range and actually get off proper combos. On top of that, it just doesn't have any particularly weak body body part, so it is hard to end the fight quickly, and I do in fact sometimes cart to Kezu, but even when I don't cart to Kezu, I don't view it as an enjoyable experience or an easy one, just pain. Then the final monster in this tier, Gaismagorm. This monster can pack quite a punch, but of course once you get used to fighting it, it gets a bit easier. The larger a monster is, the easier it can be to dodge its general attacks, as the developers simply can't code it to jump up and down on repeat or else it would just win every time. That said, it has a ton of ranged attacks, it can make explosions fall from the sky, it has moves that pull you in with a vacuum effect, and it just does a lot of damage in general. It definitely has the ability to cause a triple cart every now and then without too much of an issue. With that, we move into the second highest tier of monsters, and starting it all off, I present All-Mother Narwa. This monster is much more difficult than base Narwa is, and look no further than the super move to work this out. Once the Dragonators start spinning and she pulls you in, I start to genuinely struggle. I would say this attack kills me 4 out of 10 times that it happens, simply due to trying to time the wire bugging in between the Dragonators, because they hit for a hell of a lot of damage now, and the timing window is pretty tight to avoid being hit by them. In general, she just does a ton of damage and covers a lot of ground really quickly with a lot of attacks, and so I think that she totally deserves this slot. After that, we have Scorned Magnamalo. He gains a few moves over regular Magnamalo, but he also loses a couple of important things. What he gains though is a ton of damage per attack, and quite a bit of move variety as well, which makes it a bit harder to predict what is about to happen, and this can easily result in loads of carts. This monster is definitely hard, and it is quite reasonable that he's locked behind the MR100 wall, given the threat that he poses would be even larger if you went against him with an incomplete armor set. Then comes Teostra, who is actually quite nasty in Sunbreak in my opinion. His damage has increased dramatically, and he has quite a wide array of abilities to attack you from various angles, while also being able to protect his face quite well, which is in general just his weak spot. If you go at this monster full tilt without being careful, you will absolutely find yourself in a cart being carried back to camp. Then we have Chameleos. This monster is quite the challenge these days. He has some telegraphs for some of his deadlier moves, but they can take a while to sink in as they just aren't massively obvious, and just in general his physical attacks do massive damage while he can also easily poison you, which makes for a dangerous situation just to exist in. Just being anywhere near him is dangerous in general. Then finally in this tier we have Apex Diablos. This monster of course just takes a lot of what makes Diablos hard and bumps it up a notch. It is faster, it hits way harder, and I am terrified every time I see it, and after I hunt it, even when I win, I'm just sad.
Alright, I'm gonna go cry.
Starting off our final tier then, we have Magnum Molo. I didn't feel this way about this monster in base Rise, but in Sunbreak for a couple of big reasons, I think this monster has gotten much harder. First off, its damage. Obviously it has gone up quite a fair amount, but outside of this, when it does its Hellfire gas explosions, it now goes off twice instead of once, one of which being very close range, which both removes your ability to deal damage during this period, and also counts as a strong punish for people who use Wirefall at the wrong times. But also, the tail beam now happens twice whenever it happens, and being hit by that thing twice is just straight up death. Being hit by it once is already nasty as hell with the damage that he does in Master Rank, but twice is just death. Then we have Apex Zenogre. This monster does a ridiculous amount of damage, it moves incredibly fast, and it has a ton of combos. As far as difficulty goes in Monster Hunter, that's sort of the trifecta. If you have to dodge multiple times in a row to avoid dying, then all it takes is one mistake to completely ruin your hunt, and this monster will do that to you without a problem. It will punish you, enough said. Then finally we have Crimson Glow Valstrax, who again got quite a significant upgrade in the Sunbreak expansion. Now it spends a ton of time in the air, meaning it is hard to deal damage to in the first place, thus leading to the fight lasting longer and giving it more opportunities to kill you throughout, including with its double beam attack that it has as well. If you thought the double beam from Magnum Molo was tough, this one is way worse. It has excellent tracking, it re-aims insanely quick, it nearly one-shots you in the first place, so getting hit twice is just, you will be dead. His general moveset does a ridiculous amount of damage now, and he has way more varied combos to take you out without even knowing what is about to hit you in the face. He does have some patterns that you can use to predict, but for the most part what makes him so tough is abilities to mix these combos up. Just because he flies up into the air doesn't mean he will immediately come slamming down. He has a pretty large variety of choices he can make at any given moment, and if he catches you off guard, you're pretty much dead for sure. And that just about does it, everyone. My personal tier list of the the most difficult fights in all of Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak. A lot of this is just based on my own hunting experiences, of course, and some of them won't line up with your own thoughts, but that is the beauty of Monster Hunter. Every hunter experiences hunts differently, every weapon has a different experience too. Of course, but even sometimes just a monster clicks with you personally in a way that it doesn't click with others, even people who main the same weapon. That said, feel free to tell me where you think certain monsters deserve to be if you disagree with me, but I hope you've enjoyed seeing and hearing my opinion on all of this. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.